Hi, I'm Dan Sullivan, the President and CEO of the Grand River Dam Authority. The GRDA was created in 1935 by the Oklahoma legislature as a conservation and reclamation district for the waters of the Grand River. The Grand River that comes to the Pensacola Dam behind me forms now what's called the Grand Lake of the Cherokees. That watershed extends well up into Kansas, Arkansas, and Missouri. About a third of our watershed goes into the state of Kansas, and the overall watershed is somewhere around 12,000 square miles. What this program, Guard the Grand, is all about is in cooperation with the Environmental Protection Agency and other partners, we've received a grant that will help you understand the importance of what we all do has an impact on our water quality and the ecosystems that surround Grand Lake. One of the things that we really have been trying to accomplish through this program and other educational opportunities is letting people know that when you live in the watershed, what you do in your yard, in your home, and all around you has an impact on a greater area far beyond where you live. And that 12,000 square mile area culminates in water that comes all the way to the Pensacola Dam behind me. That is what we're trying to do, to make sure that people understand that you can do something that impacts water quality and the systems all around you for generations to come. We thank you for being interested in this Guard the Grand program, and we look forward to you joining us as a guardian of the Grand. Thank you.
Thank you for watching one of our pre-recorded workshops to help you better understand how you can help protect Grand Lake. But I want to start out with a little short presentation on what Guard the Grand is. It's GRDA's Watershed Conservation Program. And this is just the Grand Lake watershed. If you look at the large green area, that is the Grand Lake watershed. And a watershed is just an area of land when water falls in it, it drains to one location. So everything that happens in the green area ends up at the end of Grand Lake or the Pensacola Dam and then goes on downstream. So everything that happens in here affects our lake. So you might think, man, that's a big watershed. Part of it's in Kansas, part of it's in Missouri, some of it's in Arkansas, and just small parts in Oklahoma. How can I make a difference? Well, one way you can make a difference is to think that we all live in a watershed, whether it's the big Grand Lake watershed or even just the smaller, for example, the Lower Honey Creek watershed right here. So if you make a difference in that small watershed, then ultimately you're going to make a difference in the larger lake as well. So I like to sort of think of it as we're doing something small for something big. So you've heard the saying, think globally, act locally. It's the same kind of thing. Think watershed wide, but act locally. So anything we do in any of these smaller watersheds is going to have an impact on the lake. I'm going to start off a little bit with some of the water quality impairments in Oklahoma and why does it matter to Grand Lake in particular. This information comes from the 2018 Oklahoma 303D list. And what that list is a list of impaired waters. And what it means to be impaired is each water segment is assigned what they refer to as a beneficial use. And a beneficial use is what that water is used for. Is it drinking water or is it a combination of things? Drinking water, recreation, fish and wildlife propagation, agriculture, livestock watering, crop irrigation. So there's several beneficial uses in the state of Oklahoma, and each water body is assigned one. And when it's impaired, what it means is there's enough of a particular pollutant that's not allowing it to meet that beneficial use. So for example, if a water body is impaired for E. coli, then maybe when you get in that water, you don't necessarily want to get your head in the water. So maybe it's not safe for primary body contact. Which would be like swimming. Maybe it's okay for secondary body contact, which would be wading, but you kind of need to know those things, right? So we have this list of waters, and actually about 70% of them are impaired for excess pathogens, and that's just bacteria. And it can be E. coli, it can also be Enterococcus, and it can come, and there's some others, and it could come from a lot of different sources. So it can come from wild animals, it can come from livestock, It can come from your pet in town that you didn't even really think when they poop in the yard that ends up in a stream or river, but it does. And it can also come from human waste. So we need to, figure out how to clean those up. 22% of total impaired miles are due to turbidity. And turbidity would be things like algae in the water and too much sediment. So sunlight can't get through, or the algae is just so heavy in it the water's not clear anymore. 22% are impaired for low dissolved oxygen, which the fish and bugs that live in a stream need that dissolved oxygen to breathe. If there's not enough, then that can cause issues. 18% are impaired due to total dissolved solids, and that can be things like minerals, including like salts, especially if you think about in the winter when we've had an ice storm or a snowstorm and we salt and sand the roads. All that's got to go somewhere and ends up in our streams. So sometimes we'll see high chloride levels, especially in the winter. And all of these impairments come from different sources, and those sources can include urban stormwater runoff. And stormwater runoff is just when rain falls on the land and it flows over it, it picks up everything with it. Water's the world's best solvent, so everything's clean after a rain event. Well, it's carried all that water into a stream or river, and it happens both in an urban setting through our storm drains or storm sewers. It happens from construction site, and it happens in rural areas due to agriculture or just, residents living out in a rural area can have that impact. In the Grand Lake watershed in general, some of those issues are turbidity. We get a lot of sediment, in particular from the Neosho River that feeds Grand Lake. We do have some issues in areas with bacteria. Some with nutrients, which would be too much fertilizer in the water like phosphorus or nitrogen, and then too much low dissolved oxygen. Low dissolved oxygen is one of the other issues that we can have. And these again are causes from erosion, agriculture uses, and urban stormwater runoff. So you might think, well, what can I do? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. First, I want to talk about the Guard the Grand program, because that's one way that you can learn how you can make a difference. It started a few years ago. The idea started a few years ago, and we applied for and received an Environmental Protection Agency environmental education grant to conduct some residential workshops. So we're doing a series of informational and how-to workshops on a lot of different topics. The how-to workshops will probably be more in the springtime. Right now we're doing more the informational ones. And then we provide test kits and rain barrels to residents to help them implement a best management practice, which is how we can make a change. And then we're going to be working with businesses to do some professional development workshops on things like erosion and sediment control, visit with landscapers about how they manage the lawns that they take care of, dock maintenance businesses, things like that. And then through education. So reaching the kids, that's kind of one way to help get the message out there and let them learn at a younger age. So we developed some watershed specific lesson plans for 4th grade teachers, because that's when they start teaching a lot of the earth sciences. And it's targeted to Grand Lake. So as the students that live in the watershed are learning about erosion, they're going to be able to tie it back to where they live and see what impact they can make, or see what impact it is having on their watershed and where they live. And we did a series of workshops for teachers, and we'll be doing some more in the future to give them those lesson plans. And then we're able to also provide some grants to the teachers and the schools to help implement some kind of best management practice to help further educate the students, so it's not just a one-year thing. And the goals are really to help residents, businesses, and lake users to understand the impact that they have on the watershed, both the positive and the negative impacts, because sometimes you're doing something and you're just going along, and maybe you have a mulching attachment on your mower and you think, well, that's just how I mow my lawn. I've always done it that way. Well, that's a good thing, because you don't have grass clippings that you're having to bag up and take to a landfill, or that are getting washed into the streams and rivers. You're leaving them on the lawn, and they're actually helping to improve your soil and provide some nutrients back to the grass. And then you might be doing something that you think is the right thing, or not even just something that you've kind of always done, and you don't realize that it can have an impact. And so letting people know what some of those negative impacts are. For example, we'll go back to the grass mowing. Let's say you mow your lawn and then you blow all the clippings into the street and let the water carry it down to the storm drain and into a stream or river. Well, that can have a negative impact on that lake. So you might not realize that it can have that negative impact. A lot of people don't necessarily know that, but it is a negative impact. And so by letting you know what those items are, what those actions are that can have that impact, then we can hopefully help you make more informed decisions about how you're managing things. And then again, to think that we all live upstream and downstream of someone. I said it earlier, think watershed wide, but act locally. So remember that Honey Creek watershed, we can act in there to make a difference in Grand Lake. And then that all spreads downstream. If we have cleaner water in Grand Lake, Hudson has cleaner water, Fort Gibson has cleaner water, ultimately the Arkansas River and the Mississippi River. So we impact a lot more than we think we do. So how can you get involved? Well, one way is just to attend a workshop. So if you're watching this workshop, feel free to get in touch with us and we're happy to send you a sticker or something. Implement a best management practice at your home or your business. Install a rain barrel. That's something pretty simple and fairly inexpensive that you can do to kind of help reduce stormwater runoff. Maybe if you're going to plant a new garden, do it more as a rain garden versus a traditional garden. And we have information on our website on how to do that. Get your soil tested. Know what fertilizer that you need before you put it down. If you just go to the store and buy the bag of fertilizer that says NPK, that's got nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it, you might not need the nitrogen. So if you get a soil test before you fertilize, that can help you save a little money because now you're only buying the fertilizer that you need, if you even need it at all. Ensure that your septic system is properly functioning. They can leach bacteria, they can leach nutrients, so make sure everything's functioning right. Check it every few years, maybe have to get it pumped out every 5 years or so, but check it and make sure that things are working right. Maybe think about changing your mowing practices. I mentioned getting a mulching attachment for your mower that helps leave the grass on site and can help improve soil health. Or maybe don't mow your grass so short. Instead of mowing it 2 inches, mow it 2 3/4. That actually helps retain more moisture in the soil, and you don't actually end up having to water as much if you can do that. So think about those things. And then we also have a Guard the Grand app coming soon, where you'll be able to just kind of look at your phone and have the information available for you. All of our informational pamphlets are on there, and we'll have some information about the bugs that live in our streams and lakes, and a little bit on water quality. So watch for that. We hope to have it live in a couple of months. And then you can visit our website at grda.com, and on the right-hand side, there's a link for Guard the Grand. We have all of our informational pamphlets on things like pollution prevention, how to manage your hazardous waste, where to dispose of it, landscaping and lawn care tips, how to build a rain garden, how to install a rain barrel, boat and dock maintenance, and just the list goes on. So we've tried to provide resources for you to be able to think about how you're doing things and see if there's something that you might want to change. And then if you have questions, just contact us. We're happy to visit with folks, answer questions, visit the GRDA website, or you can email us at guardthegrand@grda.com, or email me personally at jerry.r.fleming@gmail.com. My phone number is also listed there. I'm happy to either text or call or visit with you, answer your emails. And then the GRDA Ecosystems and Watershed Management Department phone number is listed here as well. So if you have questions about permitting or anything else, they should be able to direct your call. So thank you for watching our videos. And if you have any questions about the Guard the Grand program, again, feel free to reach out. Or if you have questions about the videos that you after you've watched the video, also feel free to watch out, and we thank you and we look forward to you helping us guard the Grand.
All right, so far in part one, we talked about the components of a basic system. We talked about recognizing malfunctions, and we also talked about things that we can do inside a house that affects our system. So in this part, we're going to talk about the various septic systems in Oklahoma. And why do we need to talk about this? Because in number 4, we're going to focus on maintenance tips that are specific to those various systems. So we'll just, lay down the, foundations or the backgrounds. But I want to focus more really on number 2 and number 3, which are things that we want to do to make sure that the outside components of the septic systems, the septic tank and the drain field actually could be kept functioning for a long time. So let's start with number 1 here. Let's talk about the septic systems permitted in Oklahoma. I listed here 5. So the answer to that new question earlier is 5. But there's actually 6. I just didn't include 1 because 1 is the shallow extended. It's as the same as the conventional system. So what we're going to do is in passing, we'll talk about each of this. So the conventional system, it's actually the most common and least expensive type of system. If you hear about the system that has worked well for 30, 40 years without much trouble, it's usually the conventional system, right? It's also called the pipe and gravel system, the gravity fed system. It's the same thing. Here's a diagram of the parts of it. So we have a house and of course a septic tank, and then we have a system of pipes that deliver wastewater to the subsurface. So if you can see right here, the house is above the tank. The outflow baffle in the tank is higher than the pipes. Why? Because wastewater moves by gravity in this system. This is a system that usually requires very good soils, large areas in your backyard, and of course, deep soils as well. So the conventional system, specific requirements. The wastewater here moves by gravity. So if water just moves by gravity, we can expect that wastewater is not going to be evenly distributed throughout the subsurface in your backyard. But despite that, it's still okay, even if the wastewater is not distributed evenly in the backyard. Why? Because we have a large area anyway. We have perfect soils, and we have very deep soils. Well, what if you have an area that is small? What if you have a soil that is not deep enough, not very deep, or soils that are a little bit clayey and it's not the perfect soil? Under those conditions, you cannot afford to have some non-uniformity in the distribution of the wastewater at the drain field. You have to use every square foot equally, or maximize the use of every square footage, because again, you don't have a large area and you don't have perfect soils. So in that case, what we can do is use a low pressure dosing system. So we have a pump tank. So from a septic tank, we have a pump tank. So we pressurize the pipes, and by doing so, we evenly distribute wastewater in the backyard. And it is very helpful if you don't have a large area, you don't have perfect soils. We're not going to talk some more about this when we talk about maintenance later on, because this is not very common in Oklahoma, not very common in Oklahoma. This one is a little bit more common, the ETA system. So again, here's a cartoon which shows what it is. It basically looks like a conventional system. So a house, tank, and some lateral lines. But this is usually installed in soils that are not so good as well. If you cannot rely on the soil underneath the surface, right, to treat the wastewater for you, then what we can do is maybe put something on above the lines, above the pipes that can wick the water up, so that the plants can actually take it up, and the water could be could be disposed or returned back to the atmosphere as vapor. So that's the evapotranspiration process. So where would this be common? This would be common, I would say, at the western side of I-35, right? So there's a greater chance of being effective installed in dry areas in locations where the evapotranspiration exceeds rainfall. So I would say western side of I-35, not so much rain in there. So what's going to happen is that, and the air is drier. So what happens is that evapotranspiration rates are higher. So we help the soil by disposing the water back to the atmosphere, taking advantage of the processes that plants do. I would say that this is far more common than this one right here, than the low pressure dosing system. And then we have lagoons. It's not very common, again, usually in the eastern side of the state, more common in the western side of the state. It's a good alternative in areas with poor soils, located in areas where net evaporation exceeds rainfall amounts. Again, western side of I-35. So if you have you're in a farm, for example, and you don't have soils that will get you a permit to do conventional systems, why not do this? It's a very good option. This is not just your ordinary cesspool that you have a excavation in your backyard and of course water goes there. You still need a septic tank to separate the solids and the scum from the effluent. And it's just the effluent that goes into the lagoons. The most common right now for the state of Oklahoma is the aerobic treatment units. And for the state of Oklahoma, I think, if I'm not a rules guy, but as far as I know, I think if you want to build a house within 660 feet from a protected body of water, so that includes, our lakes and our rivers, you need a nitrate reduction component in your system, and it's usually an ATU with a nitrate reduction component. So, and why is that? Because these are treatment, these are systems that are supposed to treat the wastewater very well, so that when we apply it to a soil, we can apply it to a soil, the wastewater to a soil that cannot accomplish the treatment very effectively. So in essence, these treatment units are supposed to help the soil in a way. Again, as I mentioned, this is very popular in the state of Oklahoma. Why? Because a large portion of our new developments are taking place in soils with very shallow soils, clayey, doesn't percolate as well. And of course, we have a lot of houses that are built closer and closer to protected bodies of water. As a matter of fact, since 2013, this system has already overtaken conventional system as our #1 system in the state. But as you can see in this next diagram, this is a diagram of an ATU in here, right? Our ATUs are usually in a big tank and big tank with 3 compartments in it. But just to illustrate to you what are the parts, these are the parts. So from the house, you would still have a septic tank or a trash tank. And then after that, the wastewater is passed on into an aeration tank. And this right here is the heart of the system, really, right? What we do is we pump air into it. We bubble atmospheric air in it. As we know, atmospheric air has what? 21% oxygen. The air that we breathe is 21% oxygen. So we're actually introducing waste oxygen here into the system, into the wastewater. And when we bubble atmospheric air or oxygen into the wastewater, you're making that water aerobic. And now when that water is aerobic, the microbes in there would be what? Happier. They're going to be more active. And when they're active, they multiply fast, and they're active, they're going to need more food. What is food for them? The organic compounds that stay in the water. And that's how wastewater is actually treated. We're actually just apply air, but what we're doing is we're promoting the action of microorganisms, and the microorganisms take over for us. And after that, it is passed on to a clarifier, and then it is pumped outside for final treatment. If it is disposed by spray heads in the surface, it has to be disinfected first. That some of you might be familiar with this. We use bleach, or they could be applied via drip lines in the subsurface. In such case, we no longer need any disinfection. So that's ATUs. So in essence, those are the 5 normally permitted septic systems in Oklahoma. Again, I say 5 with quotations because there's actually number 6, shallow extended, which is basically just similar to conventional systems. So these are the types of systems that are normally permitted in the state. So, okay, well, we'll talk about them later on when we talk about maintenance suggestions that are specific to these systems. But let's go back and talk about the 2 components outside the house, and that's the septic tank and, of course, your drain field. All septic systems have septic tanks. So if you want to if you want to maintain your system well, you better make sure that your septic tank is maintained well. The rule of thumb really for your septic tank is to check the amount of solids accumulated in your septic tank at least once a year. If you could, check it once a year. Of course, it's for the older systems, it might just be, it might be a problem because even the access ports is difficult to find. For the older systems, you have to dig and try to find where the access ports are. But if you could, at least once a year, inspect it. If you're not very handy and you don't trust yourself, opening these systems, call somebody, call an expert, call a professional, to check it. Again, we have to look at septic systems as expensive appliances, all right? And if you buy a $1,000 TV, and if there's, you want to make sure that TV is maintained well, right? And it is actually, if something's wrong with it, and you want to bring it to a professional. Same thing with this ones right here. They are expensive and they're very, very important. So if you're not confident in opening access ports and looking at it, ask the help and tap the help of a professional to do it for you. This right here is a schematic of a septic tank. So again, as I mentioned earlier, usually everything moves by gravity in here, and what the septic tank does, it separates the solids again from the scum or the grease on top, and of course the liquid sewage in here. We call them the effluent, right? Some people, again, if you're a handy guy or handy lady and you think you can do this, you can actually open those ports and just be careful. Be careful, of course, and inspect the amount of sludge that is in there. I have a friend in the state of Washington who does some trainings about this, and what he was suggesting is, you can get a stick or a simple PVC pipe. And then what you can do really is you get, Velcro tape from Walmart. You can stick Velcro in it and then just, dip it into the tank and have it in there for a few minutes. And when you pull it up, you will see where the sludge is, because the sludge will actually stick to the Velcro. And it's very dark and it's really obvious where it is. So that is just a simple way of knowing how thick is the scum layer in here, And this is, again, the second bullet is a quiz question. Good question again, Jerry. Right, the tank should be pumped if this sludge layer in here has built up to within 33% of the liquid capacity of the tank, or a third. Some people say it's 25, up to 40. Some 40, but up, to me, a third should be the maximum. And why do we want it to be pumped, even if there's still a lot of area here for the liquid sewage? Well, if the sludge layer in here becomes thick enough, what happens is that the residence time of the wastewater in here, all right, is actually going to be shorter. So instead of the water actually staying in here long and allowing for the solids to settle out before that water actually exits here in the exit end of the septic tank, if the residence time is short, then there's that greater possibility that the water that actually comes out in here would still have solids with it. And if there's still a lot of solids with it, then those solids will be brought to the pipes and might plug the pipes. If you have a drip irrigation system, the orifices of the drip lines are very small and they could be plugged easily, right? Another thing is that if this becomes really, really thick, and if there's a big influx of water that goes in it, this could be stirred. And when that's stirred again, there's a great chance that those solids can actually be brought out. And then again, it'll go to your pipes, might plug the pipes, might plug the orifices of the drip lines, might plug the spray heads, or if it ends up in the soil, it might plug the pores in the soil as well. A lot of the problems with septic systems are actually, it actually could be traced to septic tanks that have not been maintained well. And of course, if the tank is not accessible, you don't know where the tank is even, or you don't know where it is. Here's a table that might be helpful. This is a table which tells us an estimated septic tank inspection and pumping frequency. So how do we look at this table? This is the size of the tank. And right here is the number of people living in the house utilizing the system. So say, for example, you have a 1,000 gallon tank. That's very common in the state of Oklahoma. If there's 6 people in your house, then it's suggested that your septic tank has to be pumped once every 2 years. Or if you have lesser people in the house, there's just you and your significant other or your loved ones. So if you have a 1,000 gallon tank, maybe you can get by with once every 6 years. But then again, these are just estimates, and it's always nice if you can have it checked, because you don't want to wait and gamble, and then when you have visitors, you're going to have a problem. So that would be not ideal. Okay, so that's the septic tank. What's next to the septic tank? Next to the septic tank, we have the drain field, right? Some people call this the leach field. Some people call this the dispersal area. So let's talk about recognizing problems at the dispersal area or the dispersal fields. First one is to check for liquid surfacing. What is that? Check for uneven growth of grasses in your backyard. Here's what surfacing looks like. So remember that you have subsurface pipes that has perforations that's supposed to deliver water into the soil, and that those water is supposed to get even deeper so that it'll be treated by the soil. But if you're, again, if number one, if you're using your system, using more water than what your system is designed for, chances are, water doesn't have time to really percolate into the soil. And if you keep building up water, adding water, it'll show up in the surface, and that would be yucky and unsafe. And of course, if you have the soils, again, as I mentioned earlier, if the pores of the soils are already plugged, that could happen as well. I got invited to a party back in 2013 to a friend's house. They have a conventional system in their backyard. There were a lot of people in the house. Oh my goodness, there are a lot of people in the house. So as you would imagine, a lot of people using the toilets and all that. It was a very dry summer. 2013 was a very dry summer. The kids, they were playing outside. And then later on, when the kids actually came in, the house suddenly smelled funny. And why is it? Some of the kids actually had muddy shoes. I said, hey, why is there's no mud outside? It's a drought. And guess what? I was already surfacing in the backyard, and some of the kids were actually playing like Peppa Pig, playing on muddy puddles. And that is not nice, right? If you have a dog, for example, and you have a doggy door. So the dog plays in that backyard, goes through the doggy door, the dog sleeps with you. That's a yucky thought to think about, right? I hope you don't have a dog that goes to your backyard and sleep beside you. Grass is growing on top of lateral lines at leach fields. This is not really a definitive sign of a problem, but if you have this in your backyard, you gotta pay close attention to it, because if that could happen even if there's no problem, because your roots can actually, again, roots can actually, of grasses, they can grow up to like what, 11, 10 inches, and some of the water actually wicked up. So the plants can actually take advantage of that. That's why they could live and stay green even during a drought. But again, this is not a definitive sign of a problem, but you have to pay attention, because if there's a lot of green spaces, and that is actually right on top of your lateral lines. And if you see, for example, saturated conditions at these locations where green grasses grow, then that's a sign that you have surfacing going on. So just pay attention. It's not definitive that you have a problem, but it tells us that, hey, we have to pay attention even more. Or that it tells us that, hey, there might be something that we're doing in our house that leads to possibly overwhelming our system. All right, more about dispersal fields. Now let's talk about the care of the dispersal fields. And this applies to all systems with dispersal fields. We want to maintain the vegetation growing on dispersal fields, specifically for ETA systems, because we want to take advantage of that capacity of the plants to wick water up, and of course, dispose that water back to the atmosphere as vapor. What kind of vegetation can grow in it? Shallow rooted grasses are okay. Deeply rooted shrubs and trees should not be allowed to grow in it for obvious reasons, because plants with deep, large roots, they can actually mess up the pipes in the subsurface. Another thing that we want to do is we want to divert runoff away from the leach field or the drain field. Again, when we have a leach field, again, it's designed to treat a certain volume of water, okay, from the house. And if runoff from the downspouts of our gutters, for example, is actually routed to the leach field, that's additional water that passes through the soil where the wastewater is supposed to be treated. So that should be discouraged. And here's a very common one, do not run heavy equipment over the leach fields, specifically if it's a dispersal area where you have a spray irrigation, for example. You don't want to compact the surface, because if you compact the surface, then water would just pond on the surface instead of going down. If you have these spray irrigation systems, for example, you want to make sure that you don't even cover those spray heads, because they have to go up the surface so that the sprayer the spray head will work. And if you have heavy equipment on it, then it's not just going to work. More about care of the dispersal fields. Install markers to indicate the location of buried components. If you know, right? If you know, again, sometimes this is a challenge, specifically if you're not the first owner of the house. This is a challenge. For example, locations of where the lateral lines are, where the drip lines are, a location of the nozzles if it's a spray irrigation system. Make sure that you know where they are so that if there's a problem and repairs needs to be done, then at least you know where the problem is. You can point the guy who's supposed to repair it to where these locations are. All right, so those cares of the drain field, we've discussed that. We discussed the septic tank. So now we're towards the end here. Let's talk about maintenance tips that applies to various kinds of systems. Maintenance tips. I want to start with aerobic treatment systems because again, Oklahoma is now aerobic treatment, aerobic treatment systems country. Since 2013, as I mentioned, it has overtaken conventional systems as our most common type of system. If you recall earlier, for aerobic treatment units, it has a lot of moving parts. It has a pump, for example. It has, timing mechanisms that controls the turning on and off of the pump. There's a lot of things that move and needs to be maintained in that. So right now, our most common type of septic system is a system that necessitates a lot of upkeep. So let's take note of that. Now, the first one for aerobic treatment systems really is that you have to listen to your system. You should hear the compressor running. And this indicates the equipment is actually forcing air into the aeration tank. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important that, what's the most important thing again in the aerobic treatment unit? It's the bubbling of air in the aeration chamber. And that air is provided for by a compressor that pumps air into it. And if air is not really, it's not introduced to it, microbes are not happy, they don't function. And what do you have? You have a stinking mess, really. All right. Number two, make sure that bleach is regularly added. A lot of our aerobic treatment units are actually connected to a spray irrigation system. So we disperse the wastewater, in our backyard. 1 o'clock in the morning, it goes up and sprays wastewater in your backyard. And because we're applying it at the surface to make sure that the harmful bacteria are actually killed, we have to add bleach. And a lot of these systems are proprietary. Some systems require chlorine tablets. Some requires you to put just bleach. Some requires bleach more often than others, more bleach than others. So you just have to follow the recommendation of the manufacturers here. All right. Third is just check the nozzles or the spray heads. Again, most of these aerobic treatment systems, they have spray heads. Make sure that they're actually functioning because they are actually designed to dispose of the wastewater over an area, right? So that's what the rule specifies, that hey, a certain volume of wastewater has to be applied to a certain area for this to work. Now, if you have, malfunctioning nozzles and spray heads, it could be that it's not, the wastewater is not distributed, evenly over an area that is supposed to work well to treat the wastewater. Check for foul odor often. That's so easy to know. That's very obvious. If you smell the rotten egg odor in it, that means that, something's wrong with the ATU. Most common is, of course, the aerator might not be working. Or even if it's pumping air, that it's not pumping enough amounts of air, or not the right rate into the water to bubble oxygen in it. Or septic systems are, the septic tank supposed to smell. Let's take it. Not pleasant. An earthy, musty, strong, earthy odor is okay. But rotten egg odor, like the smell of death, for example, that is not good. There was a question earlier about the mandatory maintenance period. It's actually a law. It's written in the regulations for the state of Oklahoma that if you have an ATU, an aerobic treatment unit, the installer is mandated by law to perform regular checks of your system. That should be free of charge within 2 years of installation. So 2 years, that's the answer to the quiz earlier. Be familiar with what are covered by the warranty or mandatory inspection, and make sure listed items are performed. You can ask a copy of the inspection. I think I'm not even sure. We'll ask Matt Pace, who's here. I think the homeowner should be provided with a copy. And if there's any violation to this, then you refer that case to the DEQ ECLS, the Environmental Complaints and Local Services Division. Maintenance tips for lagoons. I'm a fan of the lagoon system, really. If I'm living in the country and I don't have neighbors, and I have a big area, and if I have bad soils that are not good enough for conventional systems, I'll do lagoons, because it's really a good system. Be on the lookout for signs of leaks. If you have, for example, liners in here, if the liner, for example, has a leak in it, look out for signs. If it's a rainy day and you expect water to be, expect standing water in the lagoon, if you go in there and there's no water, that could be a sign that there could be some leaks, and we don't want that. Specifically, if you're also drawing water from the same property for drinking, right? Make sure that the fences are complete and it surrounds. There's supposed to be a fence, right? Because we don't want animals, we don't want pets, and definitely we don't want children to go there. So the fence has to be all around. Regularly check the earthen berms, specifically after a storm event. And we've had a lot of those in the state of Oklahoma. Remember last spring, not this spring, last spring, when we have record rains. In your area specifically, we have, I've heard a couple of stories of actually septic tanks floating to the surface because they are in areas which has never been flooded before, but were flooded. We're towards the end here, Jerry. I want to end with some take-home points. All right, some take-home points. Number one really is that septic systems, they are not install and forget systems. All right, it's understandable, we consider wastewater as dirty, just to be very blunt about it. And oftentimes we want to be as far as we can from them. I hear a lot of stories about owners that just says, oh, if the toilet flush, it's okay. No, again, it's a four component system. It might flush, the plumbing might be good, but there could be problems with the septic tank and the drain field. So we have to have this maintained and inspected, just like what we would do for an expensive appliance. Be familiar of how your system operates so that you would know what to look for. Or pay attention to. If it is possible to know the treatment capacity of your septic system, know that. And if you don't know what is the treatment capacity, then play on the conservative side and study your system if you don't have a definitive knowledge as to the treatment capacity. Know what you can and cannot dispose into the septic system. As I mentioned earlier, not everything that is flushable are biodegradable. And of course, you want to seek professional help if needed, specifically with ATUs, for example. There's a lot of electronics and controls involved in it. It's best to be checked by a professional. And lastly, we want to take care of our septic systems because they play an important role in keeping us and the environment safe and healthy. You are in an area that is so beautiful. Lots of trees, Actually, my picture in the back, I chose this. What is this? It's actually the Illinois River, right? So this is from your area. We want to protect it because we want to enjoy nature and we want to preserve nature, not just for us, but for generations to come as well. Contact information, complaints, don't call me. I can't do anything regarding complaints. We have a state office designed for that. That is the ECLS of DEQ. For maintenance and repair, I would suggest to call our friends with the Oklahoma On-Site Wastewater Association. They are the guys who are trained, they are bonded, and they are the guys who receive yearly training and continuing education. I suggest that you call one of them. There's a list in the ECLS website on who these members are, who are the certified installers. And this is my contact information, just in case you have some questions or additional questions that could not be addressed today. That is OSU septic water at okstate.edu. So OSU septic water at okstate.edu. Jerry, this is my last slide.
Like what size septic is the rule for like a 2-bedroom versus 3-bedroom versus 4-bedroom house?
There is not really a definite number of, or definite size for just the number of bedrooms, because aside from the number of bedrooms as the basis in designing the appropriate size, we also have to look at soil. All right, so we have to look at soil. So it's for most of these systems, it's important that, it's actually for most of the systems, we need the services of a soil profiler to look at the soil that we have. And depending upon whether you have, like, for example, a sandy soil, a loamy soil, or a clayey soil, the design or the size of the system would vary with that as well. For some systems, even depending upon your location, for example, for an area for spray irrigation, it really matters where you are. So they have a zoning system that actually influences that. So that's it. So it's not just the number of bedrooms, it's also the soil. If you Google, what is that, Matt? Rule 641, Septic Systems Rule 641, you will be routed to a link to the ECLS that has a rule book, and they have tables that that very specifically lists the requirement for example, the length of your subsurface pipes, for example, for a given soil, for a given size of a house or number of rooms in a house in a given location. So bottom line, it's not just the number of rooms or the size of the house. It's the soil and the site properties as well.
When you live near a lake, what problems can be caused by a septic tank that's being periodically inundated, and then somebody wanted to expand that to the occasional situation where, like, Grand Lake's going to flood, and neighborhoods whose lateral lines and actual septic tanks go underwater. What maintenance tips would you recommend on those?
First of all, let us learn from what happened last spring. Areas that we thought were not gonna be flooded have been flooded. So and I think we should pay attention to the zoning. If we are in a floodplain, we have to think twice of whether or not to put a septic system in it. If an area is flooded, whenever there's extended durations, like a day or so, that the drain field has been flooded, the first thing that the homeowner has to do is to minimize water use, to really minimize water use, because number one, additional water, if it's flooded, that means that, hey, there's a great possibility that instead of that some of that flood water might go into the trenches, that go into the lines, and then go into the septic tank. If you have a septic tank that is not watertight, the lids are not watertight, if it's flooded, then water can go in it. So instead of water actually moving outside, water might back up into the house. So that's the first thing that the homeowner has to do. Minimize water use as much as possible when their backyard is flooded, because we never know how long a flood, for example, would last. And if the flood is really, it's extended towards, 3-4 days up to a week, then we should stop using our septic system, because any water that we add is not going to be disposed in there. Or if it actually is disposed to some degree, then it's just polluting the environment. So that would be. I actually have an extension publication and a couple of videos about what to do if we have septic systems that have floods, for example, during severe weather, or what happens what to do if you have an ATU. An ATU needs electricity, and for example, if you have a storm and your electricity is down for a week or so, what are the things that you should do? I'll be glad to share that with you, Jerry.
Somebody asked, you were kind of hesitant to talk about or recommend like the RIDX or some kind of thing like that. Is there other things that for conventional system maintenance that people should do other than just kind of inspect it and empty the sludge periodically?
I think that's it. Besides using it, emptying it and inspecting it periodically, and of course using it in it properly. I think that's the only way to go. I'm the reason I'm really hesitant to recommending these additives, because if you look at the labels of the active ingredients, what you would find there are enzymes. Enzymes that break down proteins, enzymes that break down celluloses to enhance the composition. And that's what enzymes are supposed to do. But you have a septic tank that has all kinds of stuff in it, all kinds of pollutants, all kinds of compounds in it. And scientifically, we know that enzymes are very fragile compounds, and they are structural. So for example, if you have amylase, and amylase, for example, are supposed to catalyze the degradation of starch. And this is the starch. Your amylase has to be in a certain three-dimensional structure to be able to act upon the amylase. But if there's, for example, a sudden change in pH, for example, within your tank, what happens to your amylase, one of the enzymes in these additives, is they warp, they change its form. And that happens very easily. So what happens to it is that it doesn't catalyze the degradation of the starch. So there's a lot of things that could happen in the septic system that could cause a lot of these additives to not function like the way it should. I'm not saying that these enzymes don't do their job, but again, if I recommend that, then I'm afraid that it could lead to people thinking that, hey, I could do this because I'm adding an additive anyway. There's really no substitute to using the system like it should and maintaining it like it should be maintained.
Okay, thank you. One quick comment going back to how far should the ATU be away from the water body. The spray has to be 25 feet from the water, and then any system that is within the 660 feet of a listed stream must have that nitrogen reduction system, except if it's lagoon. And Matt also says that DEQ is in agreement with Sergio on the use of tank additives. So considerations for the karst geology of that area around Grand Lake. It is very karst and soil is really in short supply.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
There's a lot of rock.
Yeah. Man, I didn't even think of that. I should know that because I've been there and dug soils, and you dig soils and a foot from the surface, you're already in rock.
Right.
So in that area, karst topography, and I'm sorry, I'm running blank, but
that's okay.
Again, nothing in those areas. In considering that there's really, you don't have a whole lot of thick soils in the area, it is really important that that we do things the right way. That before we have a system installed, that the soil has to be evaluated by a certified and trained soil profiler, so that the appropriate system could be installed and the appropriate design and sizing could be followed and implemented. Because you're in the area where the soils are sometimes a challenge.
Thank you for watching our video on septic system maintenance. We hope you learned how to better maintain your septic system to help improve water quality in Grand Lake. We also have several other previously recorded workshops available on the GRDA YouTube channel. One on landscaping for water quality and conservation, one about the Adopt the Shoreline program and covering boat and dock maintenance, and one on understanding the Grand Lake watershed or your watershed. For more information on the Guard the Grand program, you can visit our website listed below, or you can, if you have questions, feel free to email us at guardthegrand@grda.com, and we look forward to you helping us guard the Grand.